questions. Have questions from the audience?
Well, I'm not sure if I can phrase my question. And I don't know whether in German or English, but let's take English.
But you should wait for the microphone, I guess. Because we're also recording, so...
Okay, you have been talking about dialogue, and you have been describing the problem with binary views that we kind of want to park in two different places. I had some students asking me or telling me, what do we actually do with those that we oppose? When we think about Köln in 2015, or when you think about Stockholm and the rapes that happened here during festivals, we realize, yes, some people did wrong, but what do we do? How can we approach these people that we want to just think about the other and not really talk with? We just say, you are misbehaving. But what can we do? How can we open this dialogue? And how can we actually do something in the moment, like you were speaking about? Have you got any thoughts on that? That's my question. Very big. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a big question, actually. Thank you. I mean, as I said before, the answer can't be to like kind of neglect any kind of violence, whatever, if it's sexual harassment or any kind of violence. Baseline. As an academic, I would say, well, we need to very carefully try to analyze, for example, in the case of Cologne, how religion, culture, social inequalities, experience of Fluchterfahrung.
Yeah, also.
Yeah, you know, having to leave your country, and the kind of experiences you make on your refuge journey, traumas, etc. And not, I mean, what happened after Cologne was, they are Muslims, they are North Africans, they must be rapists, basically. Which I mean, in juridical terms, we still don't know what happened, you know, so. So as an academic, I would say we really need to like analyze very carefully. Politically, we need to address the deeds, but not in terms of identifying or kind of, you know, in this kind of fundamentalist way of identifying, he is a perpetrator because he is X or Y or Z. But focusing on the deed, on the tat, so to say, and not on the perpetrator in the first place, in this kind of, you know, positivist, fundamentalist, stereotyping way. And we must, I mean, what's happening in very often, I mean, in the feminist debates, for example, about Muslim women wearing the veil. I mean, we Western feminists very often talk about other women instead of talking with them. I mean, many feminists always know, wearing a Kopftuch means she is oppressed, she doesn't have her own opinion, she can't take her own decisions, etc., etc. how often do we really actually talk to women, for example, who decide to take on the wheel? I mean, so that's part of what we try to develop in the book, what we call this Haltung, this ethos, not talking about the world, but thinking with the world, talking to the people, with the people, instead of talking about them.
That sounds great. I'm just missing one bit here, and it's talking to the men. The ones that we kind of know that they are potential perpetrators. How do we approach that problem that we think we know what some men are like, or that they can't help themselves or whatever? It's a really tough question. Have you heard anything? Can you give any tips? Because my students, they would love to have your opinion, and I'll tell you. Tell them.
Just, now after #MeToo, there are men coming forward and saying, okay, well, we've been using violence, we've been trying to address it. And that's something, for example, I said after already Köln, why don't men mobilize more against sexual violence? I mean, it's their issue and not a women's issue. It's a men's issue. And that's what we need to put on the agenda more. And men need to mobilize and organize politically around this issue. And not only, maybe hopefully this is a start, but they organize their own hashtag, and I am a perpetrator. But they need to organize politically, and they need to address each other as men, asking each other, why do you think sexism, why do you think any kind of sexist behavior is appropriate, is a legitimate means of addressing other women, a woman or even other men. They need to, men need to politically organize around this issue, definitely. So that it can't happen, that it's like, it's only these Harvey Weinstein types of people that misuse their power. No, it's systemic. It's a systemic issue, and that needs to be addressed by men, politically.
I wanted to comment on the way of this fascio-feminism, or how do you call it? Racial feminism. Isn't it kind of just as a tool to get another stage and to sit on another stage? Because for me, here in Sweden, it's always weird that the big thing is always, yes, since we have the far-right party, the states, since then we are talking about migration. Before it was not a topic. But what is happening, when I look how it was talked about before, is since the state, they are talking about migration from the point of view of the state. So is it a similar tool with the fascio feminism?
Yeah, and we deliberately decided to call it feminism as well, and not say, okay, when it's not a feminist position, because that makes it more challenging and more tricky to acknowledge, okay, this also is a feminist point of view, but it can be racist, ethno-sexist, some call it.
Sorry, but do they develop some point of views on that, or are they then just talking about problems with Muslims? Or is there also some other social issues in it, or is it really just like monothematic?
What's interesting is, at least it's not only the German context, but also in other European countries as well. You find, I mean, for example, the AfD in Germany have in their part of their political program is that they want to get rid of gender studies. So they've been fighting against gender studies for quite some time now. Pegida in Dresden in their program is opposed to gender studies. And many of the main proponents of this kind of, who argue this kind of racist feminism, also argue against gender studies in terms of, oh, they are taking us, our gender identities away, they're taking us away the notion of that there's men and women and that it's based on biology. It's not only a kind of racist articulation of feminism, but it's also a kind of, you know, pro-family, pro-sex binary, pro-heterosexuality, anti-queer, anti-gender. And that's interesting to how this ties into each other, you know. How they, you know, I mean, for example, if we want to put it on the level of the slogans, I mean, Pegida is against the Islamization of Europe, but they also are against what they call the genderization of Germany or Europe, so to say. So this tie, it's not only against a racist articulation or against the Islam, but it's also against any kind of feminism that is not, you know, that questions the heteronormativity, that questions the Kleinfamilie. And that's an interesting link which we need to look at very closely, yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. My question also relates to the racist feminism, and especially the term. So I was wondering, so my impression from the talk is that we call someone a feminist as soon as you take a political position that is pro-women at some point in time. And I wondered, by using this definition of feminism, if we don't just open, you know, if we don't just talk more about language and terminology rather than real issues. What do you think?
How would you distinguish between language and the real issues?
Okay, let's say, I could say a feminist is someone who takes women's issues in several positions, in several points in time. So it's not just someone who takes women's issues when it comes to one topic in one country, but in any point in time, sort of more global, almost like a political view. If we would use this definition, then we couldn't call them racist feminists. We could find another term, give them, like, invent a new word, let's say. Given that, couldn't we have another debate, like one that is not so much about language, but maybe more about substance? So I wanted about your point of view on this.
I'm not quite sure if I agree that it's only or predominantly about language. I mean, going back to the question before, I mean, none of these feminists on the right would deny that women and men are equal. But they would argue women and men are equal, but they are still by nature different. And because they are by nature different, women belong in a house and men somewhere else, wherever, for example. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the arguments many of them make. Because women and men are different by nature, they have different responsibilities, different tasks in life. But they should be equal. They should be treated equally. So it is, I mean, I would still say that, I mean, this is a kind of feminist position.
Okay. You want to?
But is anyone who claims to be a feminist a feminist? Is Donald Trump a feminist if he claims to be a feminist? I mean, it's the position that men and women are equal is so baseline at this point in history that I think few people would argue that to be like a feminist position. Or I mean, that's just a, yeah, basically. Are they actually? I mean, it sounds like they have. They belong to some kind of traditional, like essential or biologist feminist point of view then. But I mean, they could potentially be biologist feminists and racists. Yeah. But in order for them to actually be like racist feminists, shouldn't there be something that sort of characterizes them as feminists that differentiates them from, well, biologist feminists and racists?
I'm not quite sure I already got where you are heading, both of you, where you're heading at.
So, is there something that characterizes them that is specific to something you would call racist feminism? Or is it just that they adhere to some biologist feminism and that they're racists? Is there something specific that characterizes them that would motivate sort of treating them like an own category of feminists?
No, I mean, what makes it... I mean, they're not only, essential... They're not only taking essentialist point of view in regard to gender difference, and then they are also racists, but they use feminist arguments to justify racism.
Sure, but that's different than them having a specific new ideology, say.
Yeah, but they are, and vice versa, they use racist arguments for their feminist point of views. Sure. For example, Muslim men per se are not able to respect women. Muslim men per se do not respect the value of equality between men and women. Per se do not respect queers. So it works both ways.
Yes.
They articulate racism and feminist positions in the same spot, basically. They not only argue a natural essential.
What are their feminist point of views other than that they think that men and women are equal? According to them, because they don't seem very consistent in that opinion either, honestly.
When you would have to go through the AfD program, for example,
so maybe that they claim that they want to bevara what feminists have fought for. And they want to preserve that and.
Yeah, for example, the one I started, this woman from the AfD, I had this discussion, who claims herself to be a hardcore feminist. Of course she is for reproductive freedom. Of course she is for equal payment between men and women. They do have. And not all of them. It's hard. It's difficult to say. Okay, this is the feminist politics of, for example, the AfD. There are different. There are a lot of nuances, basically, but they do have clearly, I mean, they do have feminist positions and demands that many of us would probably, if we would, only look at them in a kind of isolated way, we'd say, yes, of course, we agree. Abortion should be legal.
Are there more questions?
I have this. Where do I?
Oh, thank you.
But reproductive freedom should be something only for white women.
Okay. I mean, my question is about this kind of how it's not a question. It's like really loud thinking, because I find the situation we find ourselves in quite confusing, and I really have difficulties to make sense of this. And this is like this many things, but one where you said, okay, at one side this position is trying to say that women and men have different roles, and therefore they are different. But if you look at these leading figures like Frauke Petry and even more, what is her name, the lesbian
Alice Weidel.
Alice Weidel. I mean, I was really, I was like, who would I have ever expected to see such a woman as the second speaker beside this old, this macho war guy where you can easily understand why he's there. So for me it was really, it's still a challenge, try to making sense, what is this about? How can this, these are not traditional women at all. I mean, Frauke Petry is a brilliant, she's brilliant in a way, right? She is. And so I'm not sure whether you do not make a kind of clearer lines than they are lines. The lines are not so clear. There's much greater ambiguity in this new movements, and they are quite, in Germany they are like this, in Poland they are similar but still a little bit different, but yeah, this is my confusion. I think it's too simple to say it's traditional gender roles. It's not traditional gender roles. What is it about? Or do you, I mean, you can oppose my argument really, but I'm thinking.
Naja, interestingly enough, I mean, women like Frauke Petry or Alice Weidel, I mean, first of all, they live different lives, they pursue different careers, and of course, I mean, one has to be very careful and a lot more, nuanced than I can be here now, and go and there are differences between, for example, the Catholic women's movement in Poland is different from Le Pen's feminism in France, and is different from Pim Fortuyn in the Netherlands, who is also claiming somehow feminist positions, pro-LGBT rights positions, some very queer way to say it like this. So it's of course it's a very heterogeneous and complicated terrain of positions. This is why I said, okay, yeah, the near future will be that there will be lots of different feminist articulations, and the future will show which one will kind of, win the struggle over hegemony. But, I mean, not in this book, but in the book I did with Paula Villa before on the anti-gender movements, you can clearly find, I mean, one of the the general characteristic that you find in all of these movements is this how they oppose gender and what they think what gender. I mean, how they portray gender as a kind of ideology that says gender is only a cultural construction, and they're taking away our notion of the natural difference between men and women. That's a feature you find in all of these movements, in every European country worldwide. I mean, there's been, maybe some of you follow this, there's been these protests in Brazil last week. There's been a conference not on gender, on democracy. Judith Butler was one of the organizers. There's been a petition organized against, against her, that she should not come to Brazil and not be able to talk. 370,000 people, 370,000 Menschen signed this petition within 2 weeks against Judith Butler as the leading figure of the gender ideology, who misleads all of our children, who destroys the family, as the basic of societies. Thus, destroying the family means destruction of the society. And they clearly use this opposition. Gender theory takes away the notion of essential differences between men and women. And this is what we have to fight in the name of feminism. And this is what happened to some extent happened in the controversy between Alice Schwarzer and Judith Butler and me this summer. The true feminism is the feminism that says there are men and women, and feminism has to fight for women. And then there's this false kind of feminism, the gender feminism, that denies that there are men and women.
Yes, it's a very complex question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do we have more questions, or should we take it to the next level?
Just a short one. Just
Sure.
a conclusion.
I just want to get back to this morning when there was in the news an interesting argument between two men. One of them argued for investigating into religion and ethnicity the sexual, how do you call it, förövare? Violator, yeah. And a politician answered that he thought this would be absolutely wrong to do this. And after having listened to you tonight, I can guess why he was so afraid. Because he was probably afraid of this being used as a cause, or in the wrong way. To put it much more förenklat. But I think personally that one has to investigate into this. At least as a first stage, because otherwise we don't know anything. That was. Thank you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, we talked about that before. I mean, for example, one a British college, Nicola Pratt, says she talks of a strategic silence, that we should strategically be silent about women's rights, about these kind of issues, in order to not support racist policies and politics. But that can't be the answer, absolutely no. I mean, but we need to understand how, say it again, religion, culture, patriarchal uprising of men and women, of how that all, works together to produce men who think it's a legitimate means in their repertoire of being in the world to use violence against women and children. That is the politically the question we need to address still, I mean, and academically, that's the issue, one of the issues we need to research very carefully. Yeah. Again, I mean, freedom is like if we do live in the Aufklärung, which the West claims to live in, freedom of the individual, we need to pose these questions. Men do have the freedom to not choose violence. And if they do choose violence, we need to address that. And they need to address that. Why do I think violence is a legitimate means of being in the world?